I grew up in the late 1950s. Grew up means I was in my late teens. And Buddhism back then, and I grew up in Ann Arbor, intellectual college town, so we talked about this kind of stuff. Buddhism back then was an intellectual topic. It's kind of something that my friends and I would sometimes talk about, just like we would existentialism or the latest Ingmar Bergman films or European thinking. We would talk late into the night, usually stoked on cigarettes and coffee and sometimes other things. Back then, in the late 1950s, I didn't know anyone who meditated. Then all I wanted at that point in my life was to be a beatnik. I'd read all the books of Kerouac and Ginsberg and dozens of other writers. And I had refashioned myself in that image as a beatnik, as much as a teenager could. I mean, by 1960, I had dropped out of high school, hitchhiked across the country with a friend, who then went home, and I was living in an abandoned wooden freezer, walk-in freezer, in the basement of an art gallery that was called the Gas House, and over time it became a famous beatnik hangout. And this was in Santa Monica, right on Venice Beach. And I was sure that I was destined to be an artist, and I was painting with oils and all that kind of stuff. Now, beatniks knew at least something about meditation. And in that time, it was all about Zen Buddhism. That's the only kind that we knew. And Zen Buddhism has beautiful, stark aesthetic with images of the Buddha and carefully raked sand gardens and stuff like that. We all thought that was very cool. And probably some of my ideas of Buddhism even came from seeing the temples and Buddhist statues in the films of Akira Kurosawa. He's still my favorite movie director of all time. And I can't remember too much, but I did try to meditate back then, including one all-day session with Roshi Philip Kapleau of the Rochester Zen Center. And we sat all day long, straight as an arrow as we could, while Roshi would walk around and whack people on the back with a stick to help them keep awake or keep aware or to wake up. Anyway, way back then, the times were already drifting into what would become the spiritual backwash of the 1970s, the whole New Age thing. Spirituality of one kind or another was all the rage. It was all the buzz. But it was not until the early 1970s, and same for many people that I knew, with the advent of the books by the Tibetan Buddhist Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. It was then that my friends and I understood that Buddhism was not simply an intellectual topic, something to talk about, but rather a method and a path. I mean, Trungpa told us that. And meeting Trungpa in person changed my ideas forever about what the Dharma was. That it was not an idea, but a way of life. And I should have picked this up from the Zen Buddhists, but I didn't quite get it. Anyway, that Buddhism and the Dharma was a method to wake up, to become more aware. From my point of view, who would have thought? I didn't. Anyway, after Trungpa appeared on the scene, I met him in person in 1974 and was his chauffeur for a weekend and designed poster for him and a bunch of stuff like that. And he taught me to meditate. Anyway, from that time forward, my ideas of carefully manicured Zen gardens with teak floors and sliding rice paper screens quickly gave way to the overwhelming visuals of the Tibetan shrines. Not to mention the cacophony, the incredible noise of the otherworldly sounds of a full monk chorus of Tibetans playing instruments like the jaling, which is oboe-like instrument, or the thigh bone instruments called kaling. And all that was kind of familiar to my Catholic upbringing, where I was used to colorful vestments and everything in church Latin, which I didn't understand. Even though I had to learn to say it as an altar boy, I didn't know what I was saying. And Tibetan is just like that, for a long time anyway. Also, from that point onward, after meeting Trungpa, were gone my dreamy, half-hearted attempts to light a candle or some incense and just sit for a spell and call that meditation. Trungpa recommended sitting for long, long periods of time, or at least his lieutenants did. So sitting meditation at that point, at least for me, quickly became something more than just lava lamps and a little relaxing or reverie. From then on, meditation was something I had to do, or ought to do, every day, each day. I certainly loved the idea of the Dharma, of being a Dharma person or a meditator, at least theoretically. But on any given bright, sunshiny morning, that first flash of thought of remembering that I had yet to do my daily meditation practice was, I'm sorry to say, is too much like a cloud on my horizon than something that I was looking forward to. Now, in this, I'm not the Lone Ranger. This was and is today still a common problem. In the New Age, the 1970s, with all that New Age stuff swept through my whole generation like a spiritual firestorm, and probably did as much damage to true spirituality as any good. From my point of view, we're still recovering from it. And nothing was more damaged than the whole concept or idea of meditation. The sublime images of a late 1950s or early 60s Zen composure were through the 70s overwhelmed by literally hundreds of kinds and styles of meditation. Very few of them having any such thing as an authentic background or tradition that was more than 50 years old. Meditation, like in the 1970s, was whatever you wanted it to think it was, and this is generally true even today. I mean, I could go on. Well, I started to tell you something entirely different than this brief history of my encounter with meditation, but so be it. What I originally wanted to say was that once we become habituated to meditation, once we actually meditate, the mind wants to do it just all the time, at every opportunity. In fact, I no longer feel like myself if I'm not engaged in some kind of meditational state for at least a good part of the day, or some part of the day, or at least touch into it every day. Now, it doesn't have to be sitting on the cushion anymore, only. But it does have to happen. It does have to be. Anyway, I think I should go and meditate for a while and at least be still, but also very active.